A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. The Harvest Moon. The great hall of Blackridge Castle blazed with torchlight and laughter. Freya Caldwell kept her head down as she moved between the long wooden tables, refilling goblets of wine and clearing away half-eaten trenchers of roasted meat. The annual Harvest Festival brought out the best in some people and the worst in others. Tonight, judging by the raucous voices and crude jokes echoing off the stone walls, it brought out mostly the worst. She tucked a strand of blonde hair back under her simple linen cap and tried to make herself invisible. It was a skill she had perfected over the years. Omegas of low rank learned quickly that drawing attention rarely ended well, especially when nobles gathered to celebrate and drink themselves into stupor. "More wine here, girl," Lord Hadley barked, slamming his empty goblet against the table hard enough to rattle the plates. Freya hurried over with the pitcher, keeping her green eyes downcast as she poured. The amber liquid caught the firelight, swirling like liquid gold. She had nearly finished when Lady Hadley reached out and pinched her arm. "Clumsy thing," the woman sneered, though Freya had not spilled a single drop. "No wonder your own pack barely tolerates you." Freya bit the inside of her cheek and said nothing. Words were weapons in the hands of nobles. Silence was the only shield she had. She retreated back toward the kitchens, weaving through the crowd of finely dressed shifters. The men wore rich velvets in deep jewel tones, their fingers heavy with rings that marked their ranks and territories. The women glittered in silk gowns trimmed with fur, their hair elaborately braided and pinned. Freya's own dress was rough wool dyed a dull brown, patched at the elbows and fraying at the hem. "Freya," the voice stopped her cold. She turned slowly, heart already beginning to race. Griffin Blackridge stood at the edge of the dais where the high table sat. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Golden hair fell artfully across his forehead, and his blue eyes held a gleam that might have been warmth, or might have been calculation. In 6 months of secret meetings, stolen conversations in shadowed hallways, gentle touches when no one was watching, she had convinced herself it was warmth. "Come here," he said, gesturing for her to approach. Freya's wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin. The creature was small and quiet, as befitting an omega of her station, but it possessed instincts that her human mind sometimes ignored. Right now, those instincts screamed warning. She climbed the 3 steps to the dais. Griffin's older brother, Tobias, sat in the alpha's chair at the center of the high table, watching with hooded eyes. Other important pack members flanked him, all of them turning to stare at Freya with varying degrees of curiosity and disdain. "My lord?" Freya kept her voice soft, uncertain. Griffin smiled. It was the same smile he had given her a week ago when he had found her in the herb garden and kissed her until her knees went weak. The same smile he had worn when he whispered that she was special, that rank did not matter, that he saw her in ways others never would. "I have an announcement to make," Griffin said, his voice carrying across the hall. Conversations began to die away as people turned to look. "One that concerns this woman." Freya's pulse thundered in her ears. Was he going to declare their courtship? It seemed impossible. He was the Alpha's brother, destined to be Beta, when Tobias formally took the position of pack leader. She was nobody, an orphaned Omega with no family connections and no particular skills beyond what her grandmother had taught her before she died. But Griffin had sworn he did not care about such things. He had held her face between his palms and told her she was beautiful. He had traced the light freckles across her cheeks and called them constellations. "This woman," Griffin continued, gesturing to Freya with a casual wave of his hand, "has been a source of amusement to me these past months, a distraction during dull evenings. I wanted to thank her publicly for her service." The words took a moment to penetrate. When they did, Freya felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "You see," Griffin went on, his voice taking on a mocking edge that she had never heard directed at her before, "I needed to pass the time while negotiations were finalized with Lord Ashton regarding his daughter. And what better way than to see how far a desperate little Omega would debase herself for a scrap of attention?" Laughter erupted from the crowd. Not polite chuckles, but genuine cruel mirth. Freya stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. Griffin turned to the archway that led to the private chambers. "My lady, if you would join us." A woman glided into the hall, and Freya's heart cracked down the middle. She was everything Freya was not. Tall and elegant, with raven black hair elaborately braided and woven with silver thread. Her gown was deep crimson silk that whispered against the floor as she walked. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. "May I present Lady Isleen Ashton," Griffin announced, taking the woman's hand and raising it to his lips. "My betrothed." The hall exploded with cheers and applause. Nobles surged forward to offer congratulations. Through it all, Freya stood motionless on the dais, a statue carved from humiliation. Griffin turned back to her, and the warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something cold and amused. "Surely you did not think I would actually consider bonding with someone like you. You have no family, no rank, no dowry. You are not even attractive by conventional standards. What could you possibly offer?" Each word was a blade, precisely aimed and deeply cutting. Freya wanted to speak, to defend herself, to scream that he had been the one who pursued her, who sought her out, who made her believe. But her throat had closed around the words. Lady Isleen approached, her lovely face arranged in an expression of exaggerated pity. "Oh, you poor thing. Did you actually believe his pretty lies?" She clicked her tongue. How pathetic. The crowd laughed harder. Freya heard whispers rippling through the hall. Always knew she was delusional, grasping above her station. Did you see her face when he announced? Priceless. Freya's vision began to tunnel. She needed to leave, needed to run. But her feet would not move. Isleen picked up a goblet of wine from the table and examined it thoughtfully. Then, with deliberate slowness, she poured the entire contents over Freya's head. The cold liquid soaked through her hair and dress, staining the rough wool a darker brown. It dripped down her face, mixing with tears she had not realized were falling. "Oops," Isleen said sweetly. "How clumsy of me. But then, you are used to being treated like the servant you are, yes?" The laughter reached a crescendo. Freya's gaze swept across the high table, landing on Alpha Tobias. He sat in his ornate chair, one hand curled around his own wine goblet, watching the scene unfold with detached interest. When their eyes met, he raised the goblet slightly in a mocking salute and took a long drink. He would not stop this, would not intervene, would not protect one of his own pack members from public humiliation because it was politically convenient to allow it. Isleen's father controlled valuable trade routes and had promised military support. What was one lowly Omega's dignity compared to such alliances? Something broke inside Freya then. Not her spirit, but the fragile hope she had clung to that someday, somehow, she might matter to someone. She turned and walked down the steps of the dais. The crowd parted for her, still laughing, still jeering. Someone threw a piece of bread that struck her shoulder. Another voice called out a crude suggestion about what she might do to find a mate now. Freya kept walking. Through the hall, past the kitchens where the other servants pointedly looked away, through the small door that led to the gardens. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her across the courtyard and out through the gate in the outer wall. No one tried to stop her. She was not important enough to restrain. The forest beyond Blackridge territory beckoned with dark shadows and rustling leaves. Freya ran toward it, her wine-soaked dress clinging to her legs, her breath coming in ragged gasps that were half sobs. Branches caught at her hair and scratched her arms, but she did not slow until she reached the river that marked the eastern boundary. She collapsed beside the water, finally allowing the tears to come in full force. Great heaving sobs that tore from her chest and echoed through the trees. Her wolf howled inside her mind, a sound of pure anguish that no one else would hear. How had she been so foolish? Griffin had never hidden what he was. She had simply chosen not to see it, too desperate for affection to recognize manipulation. Her grandmother Alara would have been disappointed. The thought of her grandmother brought fresh pain. Alara had died 3 years ago, leaving Freya truly alone in the world. She had been the only person who ever made Freya feel valued. The old woman would sit with her for hours, teaching her about herbs and healing, about the history of their people, about the old ways that most had forgotten. "You have special blood, child," Alara used to say, her weathered hand cupping Freya's cheek. "Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. There is a purpose to your existence. even if you cannot see it yet. Freya had thought she meant that everyone had purpose. Now, soaked in wine and humiliation beside a cold river, she wondered if the old woman had been trying to tell her something more specific, something important. But Alara had died before explaining, and Freya had been left to navigate the world alone. She splashed cold water on her face, washing away the wine and tears. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark surface. Blonde hair plastered to her skull, green eyes red-rimmed and swollen, freckles standing out starkly against her pale skin. Unremarkable, forgettable, worthless. No, she whispered to her reflection. I am not worthless. Her wolf stirred again, responding to the assertion. The creature was weak by pack standards, unable to fully manifest, but it possessed a fierce loyalty to their shared existence. It growled low in agreement. Freya took a deep breath and made a decision. She would leave Blackridge territory. Tonight. There was nothing for her here except more pain. She could travel south to one of the larger cities where shifters and humans mingled more freely. Perhaps she could find work as a healer, using the knowledge Alara had imparted. Perhaps she could build something new, where no one knew her as the pathetic Omega, who had been publicly rejected. She stood, ready to begin the long walk away from everything she had known. That was when the smell hit her. Blood. Fresh and copper-bright, mixed with something metallic that made her nose wrinkle. But beneath those scents lay something else entirely, something old and powerful that resonated in her bones. Her wolf, quiet and subdued just moments before, suddenly surged forward with startling intensity. The creature's reaction was primal and immediate, as if recognizing something it had been waiting for without knowing. Freya turned toward the source of the smell, deeper into the forest, away from Blackridge territory, and toward the unclaimed lands beyond. Every rational thought told her to run the other direction. Nothing good came from following strange scents into dark woods. But her wolf would not be denied. It pulled her forward with an insistence that bordered on desperation. She took one step, then another. The smell grew stronger. Somewhere ahead in the darkness, something waited. Something that her wolf recognized on an instinctual level, that transcended logic or caution. Freya walked into the shadows, leaving her old life behind with each step, though she did not yet know she would never return to it. Chapter 2. Blood and Silver. The scent of blood grew stronger with each step Freya took into the darkness. Her wolf pushed her forward with an urgency that bordered on frenzy, as if the creature recognized something vital in that coppery smell. Freya's rational mind screamed that this was foolish, that wounded things in the forest were often dangerous things, but her feet kept moving. The trees grew denser here, their branches forming a canopy so thick that moonlight barely penetrated. Freya's eyes adjusted slowly, picking out shapes in the gloom. A fallen log, a cluster of mushrooms growing on rotted bark, the glint of water from a small stream, and then she saw him. A man slumped against the thick trunk of an oak tree, his body angled awkwardly as if he had dragged himself there and collapsed. Dark stains covered his clothing, black in the dim light but unmistakably blood. His head hung forward, long black hair obscuring his face. Freya approached cautiously, her heart hammering. The man was large, powerfully built even in his injured state. His clothes, though torn and soaked with blood, were finely made. Black wool and leather, with intricate silver embroidery along the collar that caught what little light filtered through the leaves. Her breath caught when she recognized the pattern of that embroidery. A crowned wolf surrounded by stars. The symbol of the royal house. This was no ordinary shifter. This was someone connected to the Alpha King's court. Perhaps even someone important enough to be targeted for assassination. The man's head lifted slightly, and Freya found herself staring into eyes the color of molten silver. They fixed on her with startling intensity despite the obvious pain etched into his features. His face was all sharp angles and pale skin, with a neatly trimmed beard that framed a mouth pressed into a tight line. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice rough and commanding even in weakness. Not safe. Freya ignored the warning and dropped to her knees beside him. Now that she was closer, she could see the full extent of his injuries. Deep gashes across his chest and arms, the edges clean as if made by blades rather than claws. A particularly nasty wound in his side still bled sluggishly, soaking through the torn fabric of his shirt. "You need help," she said, already untying the small pouch at her belt where she kept basic supplies. Her grandmother had taught her to always carry certain herbs, certain tools. "How many attacked you?" "6. The man's silver eyes tracked her movements. "Mercenaries. Hired by someone who wants me dead." Freya pulled out a small bundle of dried yarrow and began crushing it between her fingers. "Where are your guards?" "Your pack? Dead or scattered?" He winced as she pressed the crushed herb against the wound in his side. "We were ambushed on the road. I managed to escape, but not without cost." The metallic scent she had noticed earlier was stronger now. Silver. Someone had used weapons forged with silver to ensure the wounds would not heal quickly. Against a normal shifter, such weapons were cruel. Against someone of high rank, they were strategic. "This will hurt," Freya warned, then packed more of the yarrow directly into the deepest gash. The man's jaw clenched, but he made no sound. His hand shot out, however, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. The moment his skin touched hers, something happened. A jolt of energy passed between them, sharp and electric. Freya gasped, her wolf suddenly surging forward with a force she had never experienced. The small, quiet creature that normally cowered in the back of her mind roared to life, pressing against her consciousness as if trying to reach through her skin to touch this man. His silver eyes widened fractionally. He felt it too, whatever this was. Freya pulled her hand back, heart racing. "I need to clean the wounds properly. There is a cave not far from here, one I used to hide in as a child. Can you walk?" "I can try." He shifted, attempting to stand, and immediately went pale. His hand pressed against his side, where blood continued to seep through the makeshift bandage. Freya ducked under his arm, bracing herself against his weight. He was heavy, solid muscle and bone, but she managed to get him upright. They stumbled together through the forest, following a path only Freya could see in the darkness. Her wolf guided her, lending strength she did not normally possess. The cave entrance was hidden behind a curtain of vines and overgrown ferns. Freya had discovered it years ago while fleeing from pack children who enjoyed tormenting the weak Omega girl. It had been her sanctuary then, and she prayed it would serve as one now. She eased the man down onto the dry stone floor just inside the entrance. The cave was small but deep, extending back into the hillside far enough that the rear chamber stayed dry even during heavy rains. Freya had stashed supplies here over the years. A flint and steel for starting fires, a few candles stolen from the castle stores, old blankets that smelled of mildew but would provide warmth. Working quickly, she lit one of the candles. Warm light flickered across the cave walls, illuminating the man's face properly for the first time. He was beautiful in a harsh, angular way. High cheekbones, a straight nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and healed slightly crooked. The beard covering his jaw was neatly trimmed despite the obvious trauma he had endured. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Silver gray and sharp, they watched her every movement with an intelligence that suggested he was cataloging everything about her. "What is your name?" he asked as she began cutting away the ruined fabric of his shirt. "Freya Caldwell." She did not ask his in return. If he wanted her to know, he would tell her. If he preferred to remain anonymous, that was his right. "You are from Blackridge Pack." It was not a question. He could probably scent it on her, the mark of her territory. "Yes." Freya focused on cleaning the wound in his chest, using water from her flask and strips torn from her own underskirt. The gashes were deep, but clean. If she could keep them from becoming infected and prevent excessive blood loss, he would heal. Eventually. "And you wandered this far from your territory alone at night. Because..." Freya's hands stilled. She could tell him the truth about Griffin and the humiliation and the desperate need to escape. But what would this stranger care about the petty cruelties of one low-ranking Omega? "I needed to clear my head," she said finally. "I smelled blood and followed it. Foolish." But his tone held a note of something that might have been approval. "Most would have run the other direction. Most have more sense than I do." Freya moved to examine the wound in his side, the worst of them all. The blade had gone deep, possibly nicking something vital. "This one needs proper stitching." I will have to go back to Blackridge to get supplies. No. His hand caught hers again, and again that strange current passed between them. Too dangerous. They may be watching the territory, waiting to see who comes seeking medical supplies. It would lead them here. He was right, of course. But without proper care, this wound could kill him through blood loss or infection. Freya sat back on her heels, thinking. Her grandmother had taught her many things about healing, including some of the old methods that did not require a healer's kit. I can use pine resin to seal it, she said slowly. It will hurt worse than stitches, but it will hold. The man studied her face for a long moment. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once. Do it. Freya left him propped against the cave wall, while she ventured back into the forest to find what she needed. Pine trees grew in abundance this far north, their sticky resin easy to collect if you knew where to look. She also gathered more yarrow, some comfrey for its healing properties, and a handful of willow bark that could be brewed into a tea to dull pain. By the time she returned, the man's eyes had closed. For a terrifying moment, she thought he had died, but then she saw the slight rise and fall of his chest. Unconscious then, perhaps better that way for what she was about to do. She built a small fire near the cave entrance, using dried moss and twigs as kindling. The pine resin needed to be heated until it became liquid and sticky. While it warmed, she brewed the willow bark tea and managed to get a few sips down the man's throat without fully waking him. The process of sealing the wound was brutal, even with the patient unconscious. Freya had to clean it again, pack it with crushed comfrey and yarrow, then pour the hot resin directly over it. The smell of burning flesh and pine filled the cave. The man's body jerked, a low groan escaping his throat, but he did not wake. When it was done, Freya collapsed beside him, shaking from exhaustion and the aftermath of fear. She had just treated wounds on the Alpha King himself, because there was no doubt now who he was. The royal symbols on his clothes, the aura of power that clung to him even injured and unconscious, the way her wolf had reacted to his presence. This was Magnus Valerius Stormborn, the Alpha King, ruler of all shifter territories. A man who had lived for centuries through means most did not understand, and she had just saved his life. Freya pulled one of the musty blankets over both of them and settled in to wait. Dawn would come eventually. For now, all she could do was monitor his breathing and pray the fever did not set in. The first day passed in a blur of checking wounds and forcing water between his lips. The second day brought fever, as she had feared. The king thrashed and muttered in his delirium, words in languages Freya did not recognize. She bathed his forehead with cool water from the stream and watched helplessly as his powerful body fought the infection. On the morning of the third day, his eyes opened, clear and focused, no longer clouded by fever. "You are still here," he said, his voice hoarse but strong. "Where else would I be?" Freya offered him water, which he drank gratefully. Most would have fled. Helping me carries risk. Freya shrugged. "My grandmother taught me that healers do not choose their patients based on politics or risk. We heal because it is what we are called to do. Your grandmother," Magnus's silver eyes sharpened with interest. "Tell me about her." So Freya did. She told him about Ilara, the old woman who had raised her after her parents died. How Ilara had known things, old things, that most shifters had forgotten. How she had been oddly educated for someone of her station, able to read and write, knowledgeable about history and healing and the movements of stars. "She used to say I had special blood," Freya admitted, feeling foolish. "That I had a greater purpose. I always thought she just wanted to make me feel better about being a weak Omega." Magnus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful. "What was her full name? Your grandmother?" "Ilara Caldwell. She died 3 years ago." Something flickered across the king's face, gone too quickly for Freya to identify. He shifted, testing his wounds, and seemed satisfied that they were healing properly. "You saved my life, Freya Caldwell," he said formally. "That is a debt I do not take lightly. I do not want payment." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I helped because you needed help. That is all." Before Magnus could respond, his head snapped toward the cave entrance. Every muscle in his body tensed. "Someone comes," he said quietly. "Pack." Freya smelled it a moment later. Multiple shifters, moving through the forest with purpose. Her heart leapt into her throat. Had Blackridge sent out a search party? Had someone seen her with the king? Magnus attempted to stand, swaying slightly. "Stay behind me." "You can barely walk," Freya protested. "And yet I am still more dangerous than whatever comes." There was no boast in his words, merely statement of fact. The footsteps grew closer. Then a voice called out, sharp with urgency. "My king! We have been searching for 3 days. Show yourself." Magnus relaxed fractionally. Oren, a man appeared at the cave entrance, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and eyes. He wore the same black and silver livery as Magnus, though his was intact and clean. Behind him came 4 more men, all armed, all radiating the controlled power of trained warriors. Oren's gaze swept the cave, landing on Freya with immediate suspicion. "Who is this?" "The woman who saved my life." Magnus's voice carried an edge of warning. "You will treat her with the respect such an act deserves." Oren's expression remained wary, but he inclined his head to Freya. "My lady." "She is no lady," Freya corrected quietly. "Just a healer who happened to be in the right place. Or the wrong place, depending on perspective," one of the other guards muttered. Magnus silenced him with a look. "Prepare a litter. I can walk, but not the distance back to the castle." He turned to Freya. "You will accompany us." It was not a request. Freya thought about refusing, but where would she go? Back to Blackridge, where everyone had witnessed her humiliation? South to the cities? Alone and unprotected? "Very well," she said. As the guards prepared to transport their king, Magnus caught her eye one last time. Something passed between them in that look. An acknowledgement of the strange connection neither could explain. Freya followed them out of the cave that had been her sanctuary, into a future she could not begin to predict. Chapter 3. Gilded Cage. The journey back to Ravenmoor took 5 days. Freya rode in a covered wagon with cushioned seats, a luxury she had never experienced. The royal guards maintained a respectful distance, but their presence was constant, a reminder that she was not traveling of her own free will. Magnus had left the morning after Oren's arrival, carried on a litter by 4 strong men. Before departing, he had approached Freya where she stood uncertainly beside the cave entrance. "You will be escorted to Ravenmoor," he said, his silver eyes intense despite the lingering pain from his injuries. "I am issuing a formal summons for you to attend court." Freya shook her head immediately. "That is not necessary, my lord. I only did what any healer would do. There is no debt between us." Nevertheless, Magnus stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the pine resin still clinging to his bandages, mixed with something deeper, something that made her wolf stir restlessly. "In 2 weeks' time, I am holding a festival, a celebration of the harvest, and an opportunity to choose my queen. You will attend." The words hit Freya with the force of a physical blow. "My lord, I cannot. I am not suited for such an event. I have no place among nobles and courtiers. That is not for you to decide." His voice held the weight of absolute authority. "The summons has been issued. Refusal would be seen as an insult to the crown." Freya wanted to argue further, to explain that returning to any sort of public gathering after what had happened at Blackridge would be torture. But one did not argue with the Alpha King. One obeyed or faced consequences. So she had nodded, swallowed her protests, and allowed herself to be placed in the wagon. The news of the royal summons reached Blackridge before Freya's escort even arrived to collect her meager possessions. She learned this from the tight-lipped anger on Alpha Tobias's face when he met the royal guards at the castle gates. "The Omega girl aided the king during his time of need," Oren explained formally. "His Majesty wishes to honor her service by inviting her to court." Tobias's jaw worked as if chewing on words he could not safely speak. Finally, he managed, "The honor is ours. Of course she may attend." Griffin appeared in the courtyard, drawn by the commotion. His blue eyes widened when he saw the royal livery, then narrowed with calculation when Oren mentioned Freya's name. "Freya Caldwell?" Griffin laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "The little Omega who scrubs pots in our kitchens? She claims to have met the king? She did more than meet him." Oren's voice was cold. "She saved his life when others would have left him to die." The laughter died on Griffin's lips. He stared at Freya with an expression she could not quite decipher. Disbelief, certainly. But beneath it, something that might have been concern. Lady Aisling materialized at Griffin's elbow, her beautiful face arranged in lines of disdain. How convenient. A low-ranking nobody suddenly thrust into the king's notice. One wonders what methods she employed to capture such attention. The insinuation was clear. Freya felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept her gaze level. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth. The guards collected her few belongings from the servants' quarters where she had lived since her grandmother's death. A spare dress, a comb with missing teeth, the leather pouch containing her herbs and healing supplies. Everything she owned fit in a single cloth bag. When they departed Blackridge, Freya did not look back. Ravenmoor Castle rose from the landscape like a dark crown, built from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The fortress dominated the surrounding countryside. Tall towers pierced the sky, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds. Flags bearing the royal symbol snapped in the wind that perpetually swept across the high walls. Freya had never seen anything so grand or so intimidating. The wagon rolled through gates thick enough to withstand siege warfare and into a courtyard paved with smooth stone. Servants in royal livery rushed forward to assist her, their faces carefully neutral as they took in her worn dress and simple appearance. "This way, my lady," a woman with silver-streaked hair said, leading Freya through a doorway and up a winding staircase. "I am not a lady," Freya corrected quietly. The woman glanced back with an expression that might have been sympathy. "The king has declared you an honored guest. Therefore, you will be treated as such." The chambers they brought her to were larger than the entire servants' quarters at Blackridge. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its curtains deep blue velvet embroidered with silver thread. Thick rugs covered the stone floor. A window looked out over gardens where late-season roses still bloomed. "There are gowns in the wardrobe," the silver-haired woman explained. "His Majesty ordered them prepared for you. If they do not fit properly, seamstresses will make adjustments. Meals will be brought to you until you feel comfortable dining in the great hall." After the woman left, Freya stood in the center of the room and slowly turned, taking it all in. This could not be real. Any moment she would wake up in her narrow bed at Blackridge, this entire experience revealed as some fever dream. But the soft carpet beneath her feet was real. The sweet scent of roses drifting through the window was real. The ache in her chest that came from being surrounded by luxury she had never earned was painfully, unmistakably real. 2 weeks passed in a strange blur. Freya kept mostly to her chambers, venturing out only for walks in the gardens when she thought no one would be around. The castle staff treated her with polite deference that felt wrong. She was nobody. The daughter of nobody. Granddaughter of a woman who had hidden among commoners, for reasons Freya still did not understand. Magnus had not called for her. According to the hushed conversations Freya overheard, the king was recovering from his injuries and dealing with the investigation into who had ordered the ambush. Traitors had been found within his own council. Executions had been carried out. The royal court was in turmoil. Freya told herself she was relieved not to face him again. The strange connection she had felt in the cave, the way her wolf had responded to his presence, was surely just a result of the heightened emotions of the situation. Nothing more. She almost believed it. On the morning of the festival's first day, Freya woke to find her chambers invaded by a small army of servants. They drew a bath in a copper tub filled with hot water scented with lavender and rose petals. They washed her hair, working through the tangles with patient fingers. They dressed her in a gown of pale silver that made her green eyes seem to glow. "You look beautiful, my lady," the silver-haired woman said, pinning Freya's blonde hair into an elegant arrangement. Freya stared at her reflection in the polished silver mirror and barely recognized the person looking back. Beautiful felt like too strong a word, but she looked different, refined, almost like she belonged among the nobles who had begun arriving over the past week. The gardens had been transformed for the festival. Silk pavilions in jewel tones dotted the landscape. Musicians played instruments Freya had only heard from a distance. Tables groaned under the weight of food she could not name. And everywhere, beautiful women in stunning gowns moved through the crowd, each one clearly hoping to catch the king's eye. Freya counted at least 30 noble ladies, though there might have been more. They clustered in groups, eyeing each other with competitive calculation. A few glanced at Freya as she emerged into the gardens, their expressions dismissive once they assessed her low rank. "Well, well," the voice cut through the pleasant afternoon air. "Look who has risen above her station." Freya turned to find Lady Aisling approaching, Griffin at her side. The noblewoman wore crimson silk that matched her lips, her dark hair piled high and studded with rubies. Griffin looked uncomfortable in formal attire, his blue eyes cold. "Lady Aisling?" "Griffin." Freya kept her voice steady, though her heart had begun to race. Memories flooded back, wine soaking through her dress, laughter echoing off stone walls, the taste of humiliation sharp on her tongue. Her hands wanted to shake. Her breathing wanted to quicken. But she forced them steady through sheer will. She would not break. Not again. Not in front of them. "The king's little charity case," Aisling said, circling Freya slowly. "Tell me, what exactly did you do to earn such favor? I am sure everyone is curious." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Several nearby nobles turned to listen, their interest piqued by potential scandal. "I helped someone who needed help," Freya replied calmly. "Nothing more. Nothing more." Griffin's laugh was harsh. "Come now, Freya. We all know what tricks desperate women employ. Did you seduce him while he was vulnerable? Did you offer yourself in exchange for a place at court?" The words should have wounded her. A month ago, they would have. But something had changed during those 3 days in the cave, watching over a wounded king who could have killed her with a thought, but chose to trust her instead. If you need to believe that to explain how a low-ranking Omega could matter to someone like the king, then believe it, Freya said. "Your assumptions reveal more about you than they do about me." Aisling's beautiful face twisted with anger. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You think this changes anything? You think some fancy clothes and a few weeks in a castle make you worthy? You are still the same pathetic creature we humiliated at the Harvest Festival. Everyone knows it. Soon the king will know it too." Freya held the woman's gaze without flinching. Inside, her wolf snarled defiance. Outside, she maintained perfect composure. "Is that all?" Freya asked quietly. The question seemed to infuriate Aisling more than any argument. Before she could respond, a hush fell over the gardens. Every head turned toward the castle entrance. Magnus Valerius Stormborn emerged into the afternoon sunlight. He wore black as always, but this time it was formal court attire. A long coat embroidered with silver thread over a silk shirt and tailored trousers. His dark hair had been pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features. The neat beard framed his mouth, but it was his eyes that captured attention. Silver gray and piercing, they swept across the assembled nobles with the weight of absolute authority. Every shifter present felt the pull of his power. Alphas bowed their heads instinctively. Omegas dropped their gazes. Even Aisling took an involuntary step back. Magnus descended the stone steps with fluid grace, his injuries apparently healed. His gaze moved through the crowd, passing over the beautiful noble ladies in their jewel-toned gowns, the powerful alphas from distant territories, the assembled courtiers and guards. His silver eyes found Freya across the garden. For a moment that stretched impossibly long, they simply looked at each other. Freya felt that same electric current that had passed between them in the cave, stronger now, almost visible in the air between them. Then Magnus turned to address the crowd, and the moment broke. "Welcome," the king said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space. "You honor me with your presence. Let the festival begin." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Musicians struck up a lively tune. Servants moved through the gardens with trays of wine and delicacies. Aisling grabbed Freya's arm, her nails digging in hard enough to bruise. "Stay away from him," she hissed. "You do not belong here." Freya pulled free and walked away without responding. Let Aisling threaten, let Griffin mock. None of it mattered anymore. That evening, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, a servant appeared at Freya's chambers with a message. The king requested her presence in his private study. Freya followed the servant through winding corridors and up stairs that seemed to climb endlessly. They stopped at a heavy wooden door, carved with intricate designs. The servant knocked once, then stepped aside. "Enter." Magnus called from within. The study was smaller than Freya expected, lined with shelves holding more books than she had ever seen in one place. A fire crackled in the hearth. Magnus stood by the window, a glass of dark liquid in his hand, staring out at the last rays of sunset. He turned when she entered, and Freya saw fatigue in the lines around his eyes. Being king carried weight that luxury could not ease. "You came," he said. "You summoned." "I obey." Freya remained near the door, uncertain. Magnus gestured to a chair near the fire. "Sit, please. We need to talk about something important." Freya sat, her hands folded in her lap. The silver gown whispered against the leather cushions. Magnus remained standing, studying her face with that same intensity he had shown in the cave. "I have lived a very long time, Freya. Centuries, though most do not know the true extent of it. In that time I have learned to recognize certain signs, certain markers that indicate bloodlines most believe extinct." Freya's pulse quickened. "My lord? Your grandmother." "Ilara Caldwell." Magnus set down his glass and moved closer. "That was not her birth name, was it?" "I do not know. She never spoke of her family. I believe she was born Ilara Silvercrest." Magnus paused, letting the name sink in. A line of alphas that disappeared during the civil wars 3 generations past. A line thought destroyed. Freya shook her head slowly. "My grandmother was not an alpha. She lived among commoners. She worked as a midwife and healer. She hid." Magnus corrected, "as many did during those dark times. And when she had a daughter, and that daughter had you, the bloodline grew diluted, but did not disappear completely." "You are saying I have alpha blood?" The idea was absurd. "I am barely Omega. My wolf is small and weak. Your wolf is suppressed." Magnus knelt before her chair so their eyes were level. "Years of abuse and conditioning convinced you that you were weak, but I felt your power when you touched me. I saw the color of your wolf during your transformation. Silver and red. Those are not Omega traits." Freya's mind reeled. Could it be true? Could her grandmother's cryptic words about special blood and greater purpose have meant this? "I have set scholars researching the Caldwell and Silvercrest lines," Magnus continued. "But I already know what they will find. You are descended from alphas, Freya, whether you believe it or not, whether others see it or not. The power is there, buried but present." "Why are you telling me this?" Freya whispered. Magnus's silver eyes held hers. "Because what happens in the coming days will change both our lives. And you deserve to know the truth about who you are before you face what comes next." He stood and returned to the window, dismissing her with a gesture. Freya rose on unsteady legs and made her way back to her chambers. That night, she dreamed of her grandmother. Ilara stood in a forest glade, younger than Freya had ever seen her, wearing clothing that spoke of nobility long abandoned. In the dream, the old woman smiled and said, "I told you, child. Special blood. Now the world will finally see." Freya woke before dawn, her heart pounding, and wondered if the dream was memory or prophecy, or simply wishful thinking. Chapter 4. Trials of the Chosen. The first day of the festival dawned bright and cold. Freya woke to servants pulling back the heavy curtains in her chambers, letting pale autumn sunlight flood across the stone floor. The silver-haired woman appeared with her usual entourage of maids, carrying a gown of deep forest green that made Freya's breath catch. "The king has requested your participation in today's trials," the woman said gently, as the maids began preparing hot water for the bath. "All candidates will be tested." "I am not a candidate," Freya protested, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "His Majesty believes otherwise." By the time they finished with her, Freya wore the green gown that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes. Her blonde hair had been braided and twisted into an elegant knot, with a few strands left loose to frame her face. When she looked at her reflection in the polished silver mirror, she barely recognized herself. The great hall buzzed with tension when Freya entered. Rows of benches faced a long table where several older shifters sat with parchment and quills. At the far end, Magnus's throne sat empty, waiting. Clustered to one side stood approximately 30 noblewomen, each dressed in silks and velvets that probably cost more than everything Freya had ever owned combined. Lady Iceline stood among them, resplendent in deep crimson. When she spotted Freya, Her beautiful mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. Conversations died as more people noticed Freya's arrival. She felt the weight of their stares, measuring and dismissing her in the same breath. "Look who decided to play dress-up," someone murmured behind a lace fan. "Does she actually believe she has a chance?" Freya lifted her chin and found a place to stand near the back of the group of women. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not frightened but alert, aware of being watched by predators. Magnus entered through a side door, flanked by Orin and several advisors. He wore black as always, the silver embroidery at his collar catching the light. When he took his seat on the throne, every person in the hall felt the pull of his authority. Spines straightened. Breathing quieted. "Today we begin," Magnus said, his voice carrying easily through the space. "A series of trials. A queen must be more than ornamental. She must possess knowledge, wisdom, and strength. These qualities will be tested." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Some looked pleased by the announcement. Others, particularly a few of the older alphas, exchanged skeptical glances. "The first trial," one of the judges announced, standing, "will assess your knowledge of our history, laws, and customs." Servants moved among the women, distributing sheets of parchment and charcoal sticks. Freya accepted hers with fingers that trembled slightly. She hoped no one noticed. Additional sheets were handed out, these bearing the questions. Freya scanned them quickly, her heart sinking and then slowly rising again. They were not designed to humiliate. They asked about the founding of Valmont, the significance of certain shifter rituals, the legal rights of different ranks, proper responses to territorial disputes, questions that required actual knowledge, not just breeding or wealth. Freya thought of her grandmother, Ilara reading to her by candlelight. Old books spread across a scarred wooden table. The old woman's voice recounting histories most had forgotten, explaining the reasoning behind customs that had become rote. "Special blood," Ilara used to say. "Special purpose. Learn everything I teach you, child. One day you will understand why." Freya's charcoal began to move across the parchment. She wrote carefully, her script neat, though unadorned. She explained that the first Alpha King had united the scattered packs through a combination of strength and strategic marriages. She detailed the significance of the blood moon ritual. She outlined the rights that Omegas were supposed to possess under royal law, protections often ignored, but technically enforceable. Time passed in focused silence. When a bell rang to signal the end, Freya set down her charcoal with smudged fingers and aching shoulders. The judges collected the parchments and withdrew to confer. The hall erupted into nervous chatter. Freya stayed quiet, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart. Lady Aisleen drifted closer, fanning herself with a painted silk fan. "Do not feel badly when your results are announced, Freya. No one expects a kitchen girl to understand such matters. Then they may be surprised." Freya replied quietly. Isleen's eyes narrowed. But before she could respond, one of the judges returned to the front. "Lady Aisleen Ashton," he announced. 18 correct answers. Polite applause. Isleen curtsied with visible smugness. "Lady Marin Highfall." 16 correct. More applause. The pattern continued, names and numbers creating a rhythm. Most candidates scored between 14 and 19 correct answers. Freya's stomach knotted as the list grew shorter and her name remained unspoken. Freya Caldwell. The hall went perfectly still. 23 correct answers. A wave of shocked whispers crashed through the room. Impossible. She must have cheated somehow. How could she possibly know more than Lady Aisleen? Freya stood there, heat rising to her face, but she refused to lower her gaze. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply answered what her grandmother taught her. Magnus watched from his throne, his silver eyes intent. Something flickered across his face that might have been satisfaction. The afternoon brought the second trial. Freya stepped out into a courtyard where a large circle had been marked on packed earth. Nobles lined the edges, their breath misting in the cooling air. "This trial," an announcer called, "will demonstrate your connection to your wolves. Shift within the circle." Freya's mouth went dry. Public transformation. The thing she had avoided for years because it always brought mockery. One by one, the noblewomen were called forward. Each removed or loosened her gown, then shifted. Freya watched sleek wolves emerge. Chestnut, sable, silver gray, one particularly impressive white wolf from the northern territories that drew appreciative murmurs. Lady Aisling Ashton. Aisling glided to the circle's center with calculated grace. She slipped from her crimson gown and shifted smoothly into a lithe black wolf with amber eyes. The crowd murmured approval as she stalked the circle before shifting back. Freya Caldwell. The name hung in the cold air. Freya walked to the center, acutely aware of every eye on her. Her heart hammered so hard she thought everyone must hear it. Her wolf paced inside, nervous but present, waiting. She closed her eyes and reached inward. The shift began. Bones bent and reshaped, muscles twisting. For a terrible moment it caught, half complete, as if her body might refuse under the pressure of so many watching eyes. Then something gave way. She dropped to 4 paws. The world sharpened and tilted. Smells crashed into her with overwhelming intensity. Stone warmed by sun, perfume and sweat from the crowd. The distant metallic tang of weapons. Sound layered itself, vivid and precise. She padded forward, claws clicking softly against earth. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Her coat was silver, not dull gray but bright as moonlight on snow, threaded with strands of red along her spine and tail that deepened to rust at her paws. Her eyes, when she turned her head, gleamed green gold and impossibly bright. Silver crest. Someone whispered, barely audible. That line was destroyed. It cannot be. Look at her. That is not Omega coloring. Freya completed one slow circuit of the circle, tail at neutral height. Not cowering, not boasting. Simply present. When she shifted back to human form, there was no applause. Only tense, humming silence broken by scattered whispers. Magnus stood now at the courtyard's edge, his silver eyes burning across the distance between them. He had suspected. He had known. And now everyone else could see it too. The rest of the day passed in elaborate displays. Archery exhibitions Freya was not asked to join. Riding demonstrations involving horses she had never learned to control with any skill. Songs and dances performed by trained entertainers. During an evening banquet, Freya found herself seated at a table with several lesser nobles who looked at her with open curiosity. Before the meal ended, a commotion near the main fountain drew everyone's attention. Freya rose with the others, moving through the crowd to see what had happened. As she passed near one of the decorative pools, someone bumped into her hard from behind. She stumbled forward, arms windmilling. The pool rushed up to meet her. Cold water closed over her head, soaking through the green gown instantly. She surfaced, sputtering, water streaming from her hair and dress. Laughter erupted around her. Lady Aisling stood at the pool's edge, her hand still raised from the push, her face arranged in mock innocence. "Oh, how clumsy of me. I did not see you there." Freya climbed out of the pool, water pouring from her ruined gown. Every eye in the garden was on her now. This was the moment they expected her to break, to cry or rage or flee in humiliation like she had at Blackridge. Instead, Freya wrung water from the hem of her dress with calm, deliberate movements. She smoothed back her soaked hair. Then she looked directly at Aisling and said, "It is only water. It will dry." She walked away without another word, her sodden slippers squelching with each step, spine straight and head high. Behind her, the laughter faltered and died into confused silence. That evening, back in her chambers with a fire roaring and dry clothes finally on, Freya stood at the window looking out over the grounds. Tomorrow, Magnus would announce his choice. Tomorrow, everything would change one way or another. A knock sounded. Freya opened the door to find not a servant, but Magnus himself, standing in the hallway without guards or attendants. "May I enter?" he asked. Freya stepped aside, too surprised to do anything else. Magnus moved to the fireplace, studying the flames. "You handled yourself well today. Both trials. I did what was required. You exceeded what was required." He turned to face her. "The knowledge you displayed comes from somewhere. Your grandmother taught you." "She did. Elara was more than a simple healer, was she not?" Magnus moved closer. She knew things, old things that common folk do not typically preserve. Freya nodded slowly. She read constantly. She had books I never understood the value of until later. She spoke of histories that seemed like stories. They were not stories. Magnus's voice was gentle. They were her own history. The history of the Silvercrest line. She was preparing you, Freya, even if she could not tell you everything before she died. Why? Freya whispered. Why hide? Why live among those who treated us as less than nothing? Because during the Civil Wars, being Silvercrest meant being hunted. Magnus's silver eyes held hers. The line chose the wrong side of a conflict. Those who survived went into hiding, changed their names, married into common families. Your grandmother was protecting you the only way she knew how. Freya sank into a chair near the fire. And now the war is long over. The grudges have faded. What remains is the blood itself. Magnus knelt before her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. You asked me once why I summoned you here. Why I insisted you participate. This is why. Because I recognized what others could not see. Because a kingdom needs a queen who understands what it means to be overlooked and underestimated. Who knows that power comes in forms beyond brute strength. You want me? Freya said slowly, not despite being low-ranked, but because of it. I want you because of who you are in totality. Magnus's voice dropped lower. The knowledge, the compassion, the quiet strength, the hidden bloodline that proves nothing is as simple as it seems. Tomorrow, when I announce my choice, there will be those who protest. Let them. They will accept what must be. And if I do not accept? Freya asked. Magnus studied her face for a long moment. Then I will release you from the summons. You may go where you wish, with resources to start anew. I will not force a bond on anyone. I have seen what that destroys. He stood and moved toward the door, then paused. But before you decide, ask yourself this. Where do you truly wish to be? In obscurity, safe, but small? Or here, standing in the light despite the risk? He left before she could answer. Freya sat by the fire long into the night, watching flames consume log after log. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. Special blood, greater purpose. Tomorrow she would learn if that purpose was blessing or curse. Tomorrow the choice would no longer be theoretical. She finally slept near dawn, her dreams full of silver wolves and crimson gowns, and a throne that sat empty, waiting. Chapter 5. Crown under siege. The third morning after the trials dawned gray and tense. Magnus stood before the assembled court in the great hall, every noble and territorial alpha summoned to witness what tradition demanded. Freya waited in an antechamber, her hands steady despite the knowledge that beyond those doors, her entire future would be decided. The silver-haired attendant adjusted the pale blue gown Freya wore, simpler than the festival garments but elegant in its restraint. Are you ready, my lady? Freya nodded, though her stomach churned. Through the thick wooden door, she could hear Magnus's voice, strong and certain, addressing the crowd. I have chosen, the king said, and silence fell like a blade. Freya Caldwell, step forward. The doors opened. Every eye in the hall turned toward her. Freya walked the length of the room, her footsteps echoing against stone. She passed Lady Aisling, whose beautiful face had gone pale with fury. She passed Griffin, standing among the Blackridge delegation, his blue eyes wide with something between shock and calculation. Magnus descended from his throne to meet her halfway, a gesture that made several alphas murmur in surprise. Kings did not leave their seats for anyone. He extended his hand, and Freya placed hers in it, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cool fingers. I name Freya Caldwell as my chosen queen, Magnus announced to the assembled court. Not for her rank, which some will say is too low, not for her connections, which some will say are non-existent, but for her knowledge, her courage, and the strength she has shown when others would have broken. The hall erupted, not in celebration, but in protest. Alphas rose from their seats, voices raised in outrage. This is an insult to tradition, Alpha Tobias Blackridge called out, his face flushed with anger. She is barely Omega rank. She has no bloodline worth mentioning. This choice weakens the crown. I second that protest, another alpha added, a gray-haired man from the southern territories. The queen must be of noble birth. It has always been so. Magnus's expression hardened. It has been so because previous kings allowed it to be so. I am not previous kings. My choice stands. Any who wish to challenge it may do so according to the old laws. The threat hung in the air. To challenge the Alpha King under the old laws meant ritual combat to the death. No one moved. No one dared. But the damage was done. As the court slowly dispersed, Freya felt the weight of hostile stares. She had been chosen, yes, but she was not accepted. Not yet. The days that followed were brutal in their subtle cruelty. Freya found herself navigating a court where every smile hid daggers. Servants loyal to discontented nobles treated her with barely concealed contempt. During meals in the great hall, conversations would stop when she approached, only to resume in pointed whispers once she passed. Lady Isleen made her displeasure known at every opportunity. During a formal dinner 3 days after the announcement, she approached Freya with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How proud you must be," Isleen said, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby nobles to hear. "Rising so far above your station. One wonders what methods you employed to bewitch our king." Freya met her gaze steadily. "I employed honesty, Lady Isleen. Perhaps you should try it sometime." Isleen's smile turned venomous. "Honesty? Is that what you call seducing a wounded man when he was most vulnerable? The entire court knows you threw yourself at him in that cave. How desperate you must have been." Before Freya could respond, Magnus appeared at her elbow. "Lady Isleen," he said, his voice cold as winter stone, "I believe your father is looking for you. Something about returning to your territory immediately." Isleen paled and retreated without another word. Magnus turned to Freya, his silver eyes softening slightly. "Do not let them see you wounded. That is what they want." "I know." Freya's voice was steadier than she felt. "But how long must I endure their poison before they accept what cannot be changed?" "As long as it takes." Magnus guided her away from the crowd, toward a quieter corner of the hall. "I warned you this would not be easy. There are those who will never accept you, no matter what you do or prove. But there are others, younger voices, who see what I see. Give them time." Time, however, seemed determined to work against them. The following week brought news that several territorial alphas had refused to send their quarterly tributes to the crown, citing concerns about the stability of leadership. It was not outright rebellion, but it teetered on the edge. Magnus called emergency council meetings, his advisors divided on how to respond. Some urged harsh punishment. Others counseled patience and diplomacy. Through it all, Magnus insisted Freya attend, despite the discomfort it caused among the older council members. "She will be queen," Magnus said, when one advisor objected to her presence. "She needs to understand the challenges we face. I will not hide her away like a shameful secret." During one such meeting, Freya spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. "The alphas who refuse tribute do so because they believe I weaken you. Prove them wrong. Show strength, not by punishing them immediately, but by demonstrating that your choice was strategic, not sentimental." Oren, Magnus's beta, looked at her with surprise. "What do you suggest?" "I suggest," Freya said carefully, "that we make my bloodline public. The research into the Silvercrest line is complete, is it not? Let them know I am not the nobody they believe me to be. It will not satisfy everyone, but it removes one of their primary arguments." Magnus considered this, then nodded slowly. "It is a calculated risk. Once we reveal that information, it cannot be taken back." "I know." Freya met his gaze. "But hiding truth to avoid confrontation only delays the inevitable." The announcement was made 3 days later. Magnus stood before a gathered assembly and presented the research his scholars had compiled. Freya Caldwell was not merely low-ranking Omega. She was descended from the Silvercrest line, ancient alphas who had gone into hiding during the civil wars generations ago. Her grandmother, Ilara, had been born Ilara Silvercrest before taking the name Caldwell to protect herself and her descendants. The revelation caused a different kind of uproar. Some alphas who had been most vocal in their opposition fell silent, calculating this new information. Others remained hostile, claiming the research was fabricated to justify Magnus's choice. But there was another effect, one neither Magnus nor Freya had fully anticipated. Common shifters, those of low rank who had always been dismissed and overlooked, began to see Freya as one of their own, who had risen despite impossible odds. Messages of support began arriving at the castle, small tokens and letters from Omegas and Betas across the kingdom. This support enraged the traditionalists even more. Griffin, still lingering at court despite Blackridge's official departure, was seen meeting quietly with several discontented lords. Oren reported these meetings to Magnus with growing concern. "They are planning something," Oren said during a private audience. "I do not know what, but Griffin has been too active, too careful in his movements." Magnus's jaw tightened. "Have him watched. If he makes any move that suggests threat, I want to know immediately." The threat came sooner than expected. During a formal ceremony in the castle gardens, a servant delivered wine to Freya. She accepted it without thinking, raising the goblet to her lips. The scent hit her just before the liquid touched her tongue. Bitter and wrong, with an underlying sharpness that her grandmother had taught her to recognize. Bitter root. Deadly to shifters, if not treated immediately. Freya lowered the goblet without drinking and stood, her voice cutting through the pleasant conversation around her. "This wine is poisoned. Who prepared it?" The garden fell silent. Magnus was at her side in an instant, taking the goblet from her hand and smelling it himself. His face went deadly cold. "Guards," he commanded. "Seize every kitchen worker who had access to the wine stores. Now." The investigation was swift and brutal. Within hours, 3 servants had been arrested, their quarters searched. Evidence was found, bribes paid, instructions given in writing. The trail led directly back to House Pelham, one of the lords who had been most vocal in opposing Freya's selection. Lord Pelham was brought before Magnus in chains. The man sputtered protests, claiming ignorance, insisting his steward had acted without authorization. Magnus let him speak, his silver eyes cold and unforgiving. "Ignorance is not a defense," Magnus said when the lord finally fell silent. "Your house attempted to murder my chosen queen. Under pack law, that is treason. Your lands are forfeit. Your title is stripped. You and your immediate family are banished from this kingdom. You have until dawn to leave." The sentence was harsh, but legal. Pelham's protests echoed through the hall as guards dragged him away. The message to other conspirators was clear. Magnus would not tolerate threats to Freya. But the poison attempt had shaken something loose in Freya. That evening, she found Magnus in his private study, staring into the fire. "This will not stop," she said without preamble. "There will always be another plot, another attempt. How long before one succeeds?" Magnus turned to face her. "I will not let them succeed. You cannot protect me from everything." Freya moved closer. "I need to learn to protect myself. Train me. Teach me to fight, to recognize threats, to move through this court as more than just a target. You want to learn combat?" Magnus's eyebrows rose slightly. "I want to learn survival." Freya held his gaze. "I will not be a queen who cowers behind guards. If I am to stand beside you, I need to stand on my own strength first." Magnus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Training begins tomorrow at dawn." The next weeks brought a new routine. Freya rose before the sun to train with Magnus and his most trusted guards. They taught her to use knives, to recognize attack patterns, to move with purpose and awareness. Her body ached constantly, muscles protesting the unfamiliar demands. But she pushed through the pain. Meanwhile, Magnus began implementing changes Freya had suggested. He established formal audiences where any shifter, regardless of rank, could bring grievances directly to the crown. He appointed a council specifically to address abuse of power by territorial alphas. He announced the creation of Alara's sanctuary, a place where abandoned or abused shifters could find refuge under royal protection. These reforms won support among common shifters but deepened the divide with traditionalist nobles. Griffin seized on this division, quietly gathering supporters who believed Magnus was destroying the old order. One evening, Oren brought disturbing news. Mercenaries have been seen in the villages near the castle. Non-shifters, armed with silver weapons. They are not from any known house, but they have money and purpose. Magnus and Freya exchanged glances. Griffin, they said simultaneously. He is moving from political opposition to direct action. Magnus said grimly, "We need to be ready." What they did not know was how ready they would need to be, or how soon the conspiracy would strike at the heart of everything they were building. In the shadows beyond the castle walls, plans were being laid that would test not just Freya's courage or Magnus's strength, but the very foundation of the bond between them. Chapter 6. Silver and Blood. The moon hung thin and pale in the sky. The night griffin made his move. Freya had grown accustomed to the rhythm of castle life over the past weeks. The training sessions at dawn, the political maneuvering during the day, the quiet evenings with Magnus discussing strategy and history. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in court dynamics, to recognize when a smile masked malice, to move through hostile territory with her head high. But she had not anticipated how quickly conspirators could move when desperation drove them. The library had become one of her favorite refuges. Ancient and vast, it occupied an entire wing of the castle, filled with books that dated back centuries. Since the poisoning attempt in the palace gardens, Magnus had doubled the guards assigned to the royal wing, and the library was no exception. 2 warriors stood posted just beyond its doors, with others rotating along the upper corridors. It was as secure as any place in the castle could be without turning it into a fortress. Magnus often joined her there after the evening meal, both of them seeking respite from the constant scrutiny of the court. They would sit by the fire, reading or talking, the weight of their responsibilities temporarily set aside. Tonight felt no different. Freya sat in a deep leather chair near the hearth, a volume on pack lineages open in her lap. Magnus stood by one of the tall windows, looking out over the darkened grounds. The moon was new, barely a silver thread in the sky, which meant shifter powers would be at their weakest. It was traditionally a time of rest, of staying close to home and hearth. "You are quiet tonight," Freya observed, setting aside her book. Magnus turned from the window, his silver eyes troubled. Orin sent word. "The mercenaries have been seen closer to the castle. They are positioning themselves." "You think they will attack?" Freya's hand moved instinctively to the small knife Magnus had given her, now always strapped to her thigh beneath her gown. "I think Griffin has grown impatient. He knows that every day I strengthen my position, his chances of success diminish. If he is going to move, it will be soon, possibly tonight." Freya stood, moving to join him by the window. "Then why are we here alone? Should we not be surrounded by guards?" "We are not alone." Magnus nodded toward the shadows near the door. "Orin has positioned men throughout the wing. If anyone approaches with hostile intent, we will know. And if they do not approach through the door?" Freya asked quietly. Magnus's lips curved into a slight smile, always thinking several moves ahead. "It is one of the things I admire about you." Before Freya could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the evening quiet. Magnus spun toward the source, his body already shifting into defensive stance. 3 windows along the far wall exploded inward simultaneously, shards of glass raining down like deadly rain. Through the broken windows came not shifters, but men, human mercenaries, armed with crossbows and blades that gleamed silver in the firelight. They moved with professional efficiency, spreading out to cut off escape routes. "Down!" Magnus shouted, pushing Freya behind a heavy oak table as crossbow bolts whistled through the air. One embedded itself in the leather chair, where Freya had been sitting moments before. The library door burst open, and more attackers poured through. These ones wore dark clothing and moved with the fluid grace of shifters, though Freya did not recognize them as members of any pack loyal to Magnus. Hired rogues, then. Packless shifters who would do anything for coin. Magnus shifted. His bones cracked and reformed, his body expanding into his wolf form. But something was wrong. The transformation was slow, painful. The new moon weakened all shifters, but Magnus should have been strong enough to overcome it. He managed to complete the shift, his massive white wolf form bristling with fury, but Freya could see the strain in his movements. The mercenaries had planned well. They attacked on the new moon specifically because they knew even the Alpha King would be vulnerable. Freya grabbed the knife from her thigh and pressed herself against the table, her mind racing. She could not shift. Her wolf, still learning its true strength, would be too weak under the new moon to be effective. But she had spent weeks training in human form, learning to use weapons, to recognize attack patterns. A mercenary rounded the table, his silver blade raised. Freya did not freeze. She drove her knife upward, catching him under the arm where armor did not protect. He screamed and fell back. She retrieved his dropped sword, the weight unfamiliar but manageable. Around her, chaos reigned. Magnus fought 3 rogues at once, his teeth flashing as he kept them away from Freya. But more attackers kept coming through the windows, rappelling down from the roof. They had positioned archers on the nearby towers, keeping Magnus's guards pinned down in the corridors. This was no opportunistic attack. This was coordinated, planned, executed with precision. A figure stepped through the shattered doorway, and Freya's breath caught. Griffin Blackridge stood there, dressed for battle, a silver sword in his hand. His blue eyes found Freya across the chaos, and he smiled. "Did you really think you could take what was never meant for you?" He called over the sounds of fighting. "Did you think the kingdom would accept a nobody as queen?" Freya shifted her grip on the stolen sword. "I think the kingdom will accept who its king chooses. Your opinion matters less than you believe." Griffin's smile widened. "Brave words from someone about to die. The king cannot protect you forever. Especially not tonight, when the moon abandons him." He moved forward, surprisingly fast for someone not in wolf form. Freya barely got her blade up in time to block his first strike. The impact jarred her arms, nearly making her drop the weapon. Griffin was stronger, more skilled, and he knew it. "I could have been kind to you," Griffin said, pressing his advantage, forcing Freya to retreat step by step. "I could have made our time together pleasant. Instead, you played hard to get, thinking yourself above me. Look where your pride has brought you." Freya ducked under a vicious swing and drove her shoulder into Griffin's midsection, using techniques Magnus's guards had taught her. It bought her a moment's space, but Griffin recovered quickly. From the corner of her eye, she saw Magnus struggling. The rogues had silver chains now, attempting to bind him. If they succeeded, if they brought down the Alpha King in his own castle, the conspiracy would succeed. The message would be clear. Magnus could not protect himself, let alone his chosen queen. Desperation clawed at Freya's chest. She needed to help Magnus, but Griffin stood between them, his sword a silver barrier she could not cross. Then something inside her broke. Not her spirit, but a wall she had built over years of abuse and conditioning. The wall that said she was weak, that her wolf was small and useless, that she could never be more than what others told her she was. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. "Special blood, child. When the time comes, let it rise." Freya stopped retreating. She dropped the sword, which clattered against stone. Griffin laughed, thinking her defeated. He raised his blade for a killing strike. Freya shifted. Even under the new moon, even with every condition working against her, she called to her wolf with a force of will that transcended physical limitations. The transformation tore through her, violent and sudden. Bones snapped and reformed. Muscles stretched and expanded. Fur erupted across her skin in a wave of silver and red. But this was not the small, tentative wolf she had shown at the trials. This was not the creature that had cowered in shadows her entire life. This was an alpha. The wolf that emerged stood nearly as tall as Griffin at the shoulder. Her coat blazed silver white with threads of deep crimson running down her spine, and legs like veins of fire. Her eyes burned green gold, impossibly bright. Every line of her body spoke of power that had been suppressed, but never destroyed. Griffin stumbled backward, his face going pale. "Impossible," he whispered. Freya lunged. Her jaws closed around the arm holding the silver sword, and she felt bone crack beneath her teeth. Griffin screamed. The sword fell. She released him and he collapsed, clutching his mangled arm, all pretense of confidence shattered. The change in the room was immediate. The rogues attacking Magnus froze, their instincts screaming at them to submit to the alpha presence suddenly filling the library. Even the human mercenaries hesitated, sensing something had shifted beyond their understanding. Magnus, freed from immediate threat, shifted back to human form. Blood ran from multiple wounds where Silver had cut him, but he was alive. He stared at Freya's wolf form with something like awe. "I suspected," he said, his voice rough, but to see it confirmed, Orin burst through the door with a dozen royal guards. The fighting was brief now. The mercenaries, seeing their plan crumble and their employer broken, attempted to flee. Most were captured. The rogues submitted without further struggle, their wolf instincts overriding their hired loyalty. Freya shifted back to human form, her body aching from the forced transformation. She swayed, suddenly dizzy, and Magnus was there, catching her before she fell. "Easy," he murmured, wrapping his torn cloak around her. "That took more from you than you realize." "Griffin," Freya managed to say. "He organized this." "I know." Magnus's voice was cold as he looked at where Griffin lay, still clutching his ruined arm. "Take him to the dungeons and send for the healers. I want him alive for his trial." As guards hauled Griffin away, the man looked back at Freya with pure hatred in his eyes. "You are not what you pretend to be," he spat. "Freak. Abomination. The kingdom will never—" "Silence him," Magnus ordered, and a guard struck Griffin across the mouth. When the immediate chaos settled, and the library stood in ruins around them, Magnus pulled Freya closer, his hands gentle despite the violence that had just unfolded. "You saved both our lives tonight," he said quietly. "If you had not transformed, if you had remained bound by the limitations you believed defined you, we would both be dead." Freya looked around at the shattered windows, the blood-stained floor, the evidence of conspiracy and murder barely averted. "My grandmother knew," she said. "She must have known what I could become. That is why she taught me everything. Why she prepared me." "She knew," Magnus agreed. "And now the entire court will know. There is no hiding what you truly are. Not after tonight." Freya met his silver eyes. "I do not want to hide anymore." "Good." Magnus's mouth curved into a slight smile despite the blood and pain. "Because tomorrow, we announce what happened here. We let them see the evidence of Griffin's conspiracy, and we show them exactly what their future queen is capable of." Healers arrived to tend their wounds. The investigation began immediately, with guards questioning captured mercenaries and rogues. By dawn, a clear picture had emerged. Griffin had financed the attack through funds borrowed from Lords Stonemeyer and Ashton. Lady Isling's involvement was circumstantial, but suggested. Tobias Blackridge, when questioned under oath, claimed ignorance of his brother's plans, though few believed him. The trials were swift. Griffin, confronted with evidence and the testimony of mercenaries eager to save their own lives, confessed to conspiracy to murder the Alpha King and his chosen queen. The sentence was banishment, the same Magnus had given Lord Pelham. Death in all but name for a shifter. As Magnus pronounced judgment in the Great Hall 2 days later, with Freya standing beside him and the entire court watching, Griffin's last words echoed through the space. "You think you have won," he said, his mangled arm bound and useless. "But there are others who think as I do. This is not over." "It is over for you," Magnus replied. "Guards, take him to the border. Let him see what mercy looks like." As Griffin was dragged away, Magnus turned to address the assembled court. "Let this serve as lesson. Conspiracy against the crown will not be tolerated. Threats to my queen will be met with the full force of royal justice. Any who believe they can act as Griffin did are welcome to try. I promise you will fail." The hall remained silent, but Freya sensed a shift. Fear, yes, but also a grudging respect. She had proven herself not through political maneuvering or bloodline alone, but through action. She had fought. She had survived. She had revealed power that could not be denied. That night, as Freya stood once more in the library, now repaired with new windows and fresh furnishings, Magnus joined her. "The formal union ceremony will be in 3 weeks," he said. "Enough time for your wounds to heal and for the court to process what happened. Are you ready?" Freya looked at him. This ancient king who had seen centuries pass, who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, who had chosen her, when every rational argument said he should not. "I am ready," she said, and for the first time since this began, she truly believed it. Chapter 7. Bound by Fire and Moon. The days leading to the formal union ceremony passed in careful preparation. The court, still reeling from Griffin's conspiracy and Freya's revealed power, watched with guarded attention as Magnus prepared to bind himself to a woman most had dismissed as unworthy mere weeks before. The date was set for the next full moon, when shifter bonds would be at their strongest. Tradition demanded the ceremony take place under moonlight, witnessed by representatives of every major pack in the kingdom. Refusal to attend would be seen as direct challenge to the crown, so even the most hostile alphas confirmed their presence. Freya spent her mornings training with the royal guard, determined to never again be caught unprepared. Her afternoons were consumed by lessons in royal protocol, learning the intricate dance of politics and power that came with the crown. Evenings belonged to Magnus, the two of them planning not just a ceremony, but the future they would build together. "There will be those who never accept you," Magnus said one night as they sat in his private chambers, maps of the kingdom spread before them. "No matter what you do or prove." "I know." Freya traced the borders of hostile territories with one finger. "But there are others who see change as necessary. The younger alphas, the common shifters who have suffered under the old ways. Those are the ones we build toward." Magnus smiled. "You think like a queen already." "I think like someone who has lived at the bottom of your hierarchy," Freya corrected gently. "I know what it is to be dismissed and underestimated. That knowledge is valuable." 3 days before the ceremony, a formal assembly was called. Every alpha of note crowded into the great hall for what tradition termed the trial of witness. It was an ancient practice, rarely used, where those who opposed a royal union could present their objections before the assembled court. The Alpha King would then answer each challenge, and the witnesses would determine if the objections held merit. Magnus had warned Freya this would happen. "They cannot challenge me directly without risking open war, but they can use tradition to voice their displeasure and force me to justify my choice publicly. Then we justify it," Freya had replied. Now, standing beside Magnus on the dais as the hall filled with hostile faces, she felt the weight of every stare. Alpha Tobias Blackridge stood at the front, his expression carefully neutral, though she knew he blamed her for his brother's banishment. Lord Stonemeyer, who had helped finance Griffin's failed attack, watched with cold calculation. Others she did not recognize, but whose postures spoke of authority and old power. The Master of Ceremonies, an ancient beta who had served the crown for longer than most could remember, struck his staff against the stone floor 3 times. The hall fell silent. "By ancient law and honored tradition," he intoned, "the trial of witness begins. Let those who would speak against this union come forward and be heard." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Tobias stepped forward. "I speak not against the lady herself," he began, his voice carrying through the hall, "but against the precedent this union sets. For generations, the crown has chosen mates from established bloodlines. This ensures stability, strengthens alliances, and maintains the traditions that bind our people together. To break this pattern risks chaos." Magnus rose from his throne. "And yet, it is those very traditions that have allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. How many Omegas suffer because alphas believe tradition grants them absolute power? How many talented shifters are wasted because their birth rank determines their worth? Precedent can be prison as easily as protection." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nods of agreement, more expressions of displeasure. Another alpha stepped forward, this one from the Northern Territories. "The lady's bloodline was hidden for generations. How can we trust someone whose family lived in deception?" Before Magnus could respond, Freya spoke. "My grandmother hid because remaining visible meant death for her and her children. The Silvercrest line chose the losing side in a civil war fought before I was born. She protected her family the only way she could. That is not deception, Alpha Northwood. That is survival." The Northern Alpha looked surprised to be addressed directly by her. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. More challenges came. Questions about her lack of training in statecraft, which Magnus answered by listing everything she had learned in the past months, and her quick grasp of complex political situations. Questions about her ability to produce strong heirs, which Magnus shut down with cold fury, reminding them that such matters were not subject to public speculation. Then Lord Stonemeyer spoke, his voice dripping false concern. "We have seen the lady transform. Her wolf is impressive, I grant. But can we be certain this power is natural? There are whispers of dark magics, of enhancements bought through forbidden means." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Freya felt rage surge through her, but she kept her voice level. "You speak of dark magic, Lord Stonemeyer. Yet you financed mercenaries armed with silver to murder your king. Who truly embraces darkness here?" Stonemeyer's face flushed. "Those accusations were never proven." "They were proven sufficiently," Magnus said, his tone dangerous. "You escaped banishment only because the mercenaries died before revealing all their co-conspirators. Do not mistake my mercy for weakness. If you have genuine concerns about the Union, voice them. If you seek only to cast aspersions and sow doubt, I suggest you remember what happened to those who acted on such impulses." The threat was clear. Stonemeyer retreated without further comment. The trial of witness continued for hours. Some objections were genuine, rooted in real concerns about change and stability. Magnus and Freya answered these with patience and reason. Others were clearly designed to humiliate or undermine, and those they dealt with more harshly. Finally, the master of ceremonies struck his staff again. "Are there any further challenges to be heard?" Silence. Then, by ancient law and honored tradition, this trial concludes. The witnesses have heard both challenge and answer. Let each consider what they have learned, and when the union is sealed under tomorrow's moon, let none claim they were not given voice. The assembly dispersed slowly, conversations erupting as soon as people moved beyond the hall's immediate vicinity. Freya remained on the dais, her legs trembling with exhaustion, though she refused to show it. "You did well," Magnus said quietly once they were alone. "Better than I expected. I simply told the truth." Freya sank into the chair beside the throne. "Though I wanted to scream at several of them. That was obvious." Magnus's lips twitched into a slight smile. "Your restraint was admirable." The next day brought different preparations. The ceremony itself required ancient rituals that few fully understood anymore. A priestess of the old ways, one of the few who still practiced the traditions that predated written law, arrived at the castle to guide them through what would happen. She was ancient, her hair silver as moonlight, her eyes clouded with age but sharp with intelligence. "The bond you will forge," she explained to Freya in a private chamber, "is more than marriage. It will link your souls, your wolves, your very essence. You will feel what he feels. His pain will be yours, his joy yours. There is no undoing it once sealed." "I understand," Freya said. The priestess studied her. "Do you?" "Many enter these bonds thinking they do, only to be overwhelmed when they realize the depth of connection. You will know his mind, girl, and he will know yours. Every secret, every fear, every hidden shame will be visible to the other." Freya met the old woman's clouded gaze. "I have few secrets from him already, and those I have, I am willing to share." "Even the doubt?" the priestess asked shrewdly. "Even the voice that whispers you do not deserve this, that you will fail, that you are still that frightened girl being humiliated in front of a laughing crowd?" Freya flinched, but did not look away. "Even that. Good." The priestess nodded. "Honesty is the only foundation worth building on." That evening, as the sun set and the full moon began its rise, Freya prepared in her chambers. The gown waiting for her was not the elaborate confection she had expected. Instead, it was simple silk in deep midnight blue, almost black, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that seemed to shift and change in the candlelight. It left her arms bare and flowed like water when she moved. They dressed her hair simply, letting her blonde curls fall loose over her shoulders with only a thin circlet of silver to hold them back. No jewels, no ornament. The focus was not on decoration, but on the ceremony itself. When they led her out to the courtyard where the ritual would take place, she found it transformed. A circle had been marked on the stone with salt and silver dust. Torches burned at each cardinal point, and surrounding the circle, hundreds of witnesses stood in absolute silence. Magnus waited in the center of the circle, dressed similarly in black and silver. When Freya entered the marked boundary, she felt the power in the space immediately. This was sacred ground, made so by intention and ritual. The priestess stood at the north point of the circle. We gather under the moon's full light to witness a bond forged in fire and sealed in blood. Let those present bear witness to the words spoken and the oath sworn. She gestured for Freya and Magnus to face each other, hands joined. Magnus Valerius Stormborn, Alpha King and sovereign of these lands, do you freely choose this bond? I do, Magnus said, his voice carrying across the silent courtyard. Freya of the Silvercrest line, reclaimed and restored, do you freely choose this bond? Freya's voice was steady. I do. Then speak your truths to one another, that all may know the foundation upon which you build. Magnus spoke first. I choose you not for duty but for desire, not for political advantage but for the strength you show when the world demands you break. I have lived centuries, Freya. I have seen kingdoms rise and fall. But I have never met someone who transforms hardship into wisdom the way you do. You make me want to be the king my people need, not just the one they fear. Several witnesses shifted uncomfortably at the admission of fear, but Magnus continued, I offer you my name, my power, my protection. I offer you my heart, which has been closed for longer than you have been alive, and I promise that I will stand with you against whatever comes, whether it wears the face of enemy or friend. Now, Freya spoke, her words coming from somewhere deep and true. I choose you not because you are king, but because you saw me when others looked through me. You recognized strength where others saw only weakness. You chose me when every rational argument said you should not. Her voice grew stronger. I offer you my loyalty, which has never been given lightly. I offer you my truth, even when it is difficult. I offer you my courage, learned through years of surviving what should have broken me, and I promise that I will grow into the queen this kingdom needs, not through pretending to be something I am not, but by becoming fully what I am. The priestess produced a silver blade, sharp and ancient. The bond requires blood to seal it, a mark to carry forward as proof and promise. She made small cuts on each of their palms. Magnus and Freya pressed their bleeding hands together, and Freya felt something surge between them, not just the physical warmth of shared blood, but something deeper, a connection that sang through her bones and settled into her soul. The priestess began to chant in a language Freya did not recognize, old words that seemed to make the moonlight itself grow brighter. She traced symbols in the air above their joined hands, and where her fingers moved, silver light followed. Then the priestess spoke in words they could understand. By blood and moon, by word and will, this bond is sealed. Let no force of nature or act of man break what is here made whole. The silver light flared, blinding and beautiful. Freya gasped as she felt Magnus's presence flood into her mind. Not his thoughts exactly, but his essence, his determination, his carefully hidden loneliness, his fierce protectiveness, his hope that maybe this time things would be different. And she knew he felt her too, her fear and courage existing side by side, her determination to prove worthy, her growing love, which she had not yet admitted even to herself. When the light faded, they were still standing together, hands joined and bleeding into each other. The priestess nodded once. It is done. The bond is sealed. Let all bear witness. The courtyard erupted not in celebration exactly, but in a kind of awed acknowledgement. Whatever personal feelings the witnesses held, they had just seen something ancient and powerful. To deny it now would be to deny what their own eyes and instincts confirmed. Magnus lifted Freya's hand to his lips and kissed her bleeding palm, then placed it against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. My queen, he said softly. Freya reached up with her free hand and touched his face, the connection between them thrumming with new intensity. My king. The formal celebration that followed passed in a blur. Music and food and endless congratulations from people who mere weeks before had wanted her gone. But Freya barely registered any of it. She was too focused on the new awareness humming beneath her skin, the constant knowledge of Magnus's presence even when he moved across the room. Later, in the privacy of their shared chambers, Magnus pulled her close. "How does it feel?" he asked. "The bond? Like coming home," Freya said honestly. "Like finding something I did not know I was missing." Magnus kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle at first, and then with growing intensity. When they finally pulled apart, he smiled. "You are mine now, bound by law and magic. No one can take you from me. And you are mine," Freya replied, matching his smile. "Which means you have inherited all the enemies I come with. I had plenty of those already." Magnus laughed, and through the bond, Freya felt his genuine amusement mixed with deep contentment. What are a few more? That night, as they lay together and felt the bond settling into something permanent and unbreakable, Freya thought of her grandmother. Ilara had prepared her for this without either of them fully realizing it. All those lessons, all those stories, all that hidden knowledge, it had been leading to this moment. "Thank you," Freya whispered into the darkness. Not sure if she was thanking Magnus, her grandmother, or the strange path that had led her from humiliation to crown. Through the bond, Magnus's response came wordless, but warm. Protection, gratitude, love still too new to name but growing stronger with each shared breath. Outside, the full moon watched over Ravenmoor, blessing what had been sealed beneath its light. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, in scattered territories and hidden places, those who had opposed this union calculated their next moves. But for tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Freya was queen, not just by declaration, but by sacred bond. And whatever came next, she would face it with Magnus at her side, and a power within herself she was only beginning to understand. Chapter 8. The Queen's Realm. 10 months had passed since the union ceremony under the full moon. Ravenmoor Castle, which had felt cold and hostile when Freya first arrived, now carried a different energy. Not everyone loved her, some never would. But respect had replaced most of the open contempt. The changes she and Magnus had implemented together were beginning to reshape the kingdom in ways both subtle and profound. Freya stood in the council chamber, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gesturing toward a map spread across the table. 7 months pregnant with twins, as the royal healers had recently confirmed, the conception coming months after the ceremony itself, she still insisted on attending every important meeting. Magnus had tried to convince her to rest more, but she refused to be hidden away like fragile decoration. "The Northern Territories are experiencing food shortages," she explained to the assembled advisors. "Not severe yet, but enough to cause concern. We can reallocate grain stores from the southern harvests, but we need to establish better supply routes for winter." Oren, who had grown to respect Freya's practical approach to governance, nodded. "I can coordinate with the Northern Alphas, though some still resist taking aid they see as charity." "Then we do not call it charity," Freya replied. "We call it what it is, the crown ensuring the well-being of all its people. That is not weakness. That is the foundation of a stable kingdom." Magnus watched her from his seat at the head of the table, pride clear in his silver eyes. Through their bond, Freya felt his satisfaction mixed with amusement at how thoroughly she had claimed her role as queen. The meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from border disputes to the upcoming dedication of Ilara's sanctuary. When the advisors finally departed, Magnus rose and crossed to where Freya stood, still studying the map. "You need to rest," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands settling over hers on her belly. "The twins are restless. I can feel it through the bond." "They are always restless," Freya murmured, leaning back against him. "They take after their father, or their mother, who refuses to slow down despite carrying 2 future heirs." Magnus pressed a kiss to her temple. "You have proven yourself a 12 times over, Freya. You do not need to work yourself to exhaustion to maintain respect." "I know." She turned in his arms to face him, but old habits die hard. Part of me still expects someone to burst through those doors and tell me this was all a mistake, that I do not belong here. Anyone who tried would face a very angry queen and an even angrier king. Magnus touched her face gently. You belong here more than most who were born to it. A knock interrupted them. One of the castle pages entered, bowing quickly. Your Majesties, Alpha Tobias Blackridge has arrived. He requests an audience. Freya and Magnus exchanged glances. Tobias had been notably absent from court since Griffin's banishment, maintaining only the minimal contact required by law. For him to appear personally was significant. Show him to the small receiving room, Magnus instructed. We will be there shortly. Tobias looked older than when Freya had last seen him, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture less confident. He bowed formally when they entered, the gesture stiff but genuine. Your Majesties, he said. Thank you for seeing me without notice. You are an alpha of the realm, Magnus replied, gesturing for him to sit. You do not need an appointment. Tobias remained standing, his gaze moving to Freya. I came to deliver something that should have been given months ago. An apology. Freya felt her eyebrows rise. An apology? For allowing what happened at the Harvest Festival. Tobias's voice was rough with emotion that seemed genuine. I stood by while my brother humiliated you publicly. I allowed it because it was politically convenient, because Aisleen's father offered valuable alliances. I chose power over decency, and for that, I am deeply ashamed. The words hung in the air. Freya studied Tobias's face, searching for deception through both her natural instincts and the enhanced awareness the bond with Magnus provided. She found none. Only genuine regret. I also came to bring this. Tobias reached into his coat and withdrew a small carved box. It belonged to your grandmother, Elara. When she lived in Blackridge territory before you were born, she left certain items with my father for safekeeping. After she died, I should have returned them to you. But in my arrogance, I decided a low-ranking Omega did not deserve such consideration. He opened the box. Inside lay a silver pendant on a delicate chain, engraved with symbols Freya recognized from her grandmother's stories. The mark of the silver crest line. Freya reached for it with trembling fingers. She wore this. I remember seeing it when I was very young, before she hid it away. There are also letters, Tobias said, producing a bundle of yellowed parchment. Correspondence between your grandmother and various scholars. Research into bloodlines and history. I think she was trying to document what had been lost of the Silvercrest legacy. Freya accepted the letters, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed in front of Tobias. Why bring these now? Because you have proven everything I believed about rank and worth to be a lie, Tobias said simply. Because watching you transform this kingdom has forced me to confront my own failures. And because I owe you more than an apology, though that is all I can offer. Magnus spoke for the first time since Tobias began. The apology is noted and accepted. Your honesty, though late, does you credit. Tobias bowed again, this time to Freya specifically. Your Majesty, I know I have no right to ask forgiveness, but I hope that in time, my actions might begin to atone for my past cowardice. After he left, Freya sat in silence, turning the silver pendant over in her hands. Magnus said nothing, simply remaining close, offering support through presence rather than words. She knew. Freya finally whispered, My grandmother. She was preparing me for this all along, and I never understood. She gave you the tools, Magnus replied, but you built what came after. That was your choice, your strength. The dedication ceremony for Elara's sanctuary took place 3 weeks later. Located on land at the edge of Ravenmoor's territory, the building was modest but sturdy, a place where shifters who had suffered abuse or abandonment could find refuge. Omegas and Betas staffed it, trained in healing and mediation, protected by royal decree from interference by local alphas. Freya stood before the assembled crowd, her pregnancy now impossible to hide, and unveiled the stone marker that bore her grandmother's name, Elara Silvercrest Caldwell, healer and keeper of hidden wisdom. This sanctuary honors a woman who understood that survival sometimes requires hiding truth, Freya said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. But it also represents my belief that we are done hiding. That every shifter, regardless of rank or bloodline, deserves protection and dignity. The crowd was mixed. Common shifters, minor nobles, even a few alphas who had slowly come around to supporting the reforms. Not everyone agreed, Freya knew. But change never came with universal approval. After the ceremony, an older Omega woman approached hesitantly. "Your Majesty, my daughter was rejected by her mate. She has nowhere to go. Will the sanctuary truly accept her?" "It will," Freya assured her. "That is precisely why it exists. Bring her tomorrow. She will be safe here." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You have given us hope." As word spread about the sanctuary, more shifters arrived seeking help. Freya personally oversaw the first few weeks of operation, despite Magnus's concerns about her doing too much in her pregnancy. She met with residents, listened to their stories, ensured the staff had what they needed. One afternoon, while reviewing supply inventories, she felt the baby shift violently. Pain lanced through her belly, sharp and concerning. Magnus, in a meeting 3 floors away, felt it through the bond and arrived within moments, Orin and the royal healers close behind. "It is earlier than we would like," one healer said after examining her. "You are still some weeks from the due date, but the twins are strong. If they come now, they should survive." "They are not coming now," Freya said through gritted teeth. "I am not ready. I do not think they are asking permission," Magnus replied, but his attempt at humor was undercut by genuine worry bleeding through the bond. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Magnus refused to leave her side, despite tradition that said the king should wait elsewhere. He held her hand through each contraction, whispered encouragement when she screamed, and when the healers finally announced the first baby born, a daughter with a surprisingly loud cry, he wept openly. The second twin, another daughter, arrived moments later. Smaller than her sister, but equally furious at being forced into the world. 2 girls, the head healer announced, wrapping each baby carefully. Both healthy, both strong. Freya, exhausted and shaking, reached for her daughters. They were tiny, perfect, with downy hair already showing hints of blonde on one and darker tones on the other. When she held them against her chest, she felt something shift in her understanding of the world. "They are ours," she whispered to Magnus, who sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, his eyes fixed on his daughters with wonder. "They are real. They are beautiful," Magnus replied. "Like their mother." Through the bond, Freya felt his joy mixed with fierce protectiveness and an underlying fear she recognized, that something might take this happiness away. "Nothing will harm them," she said firmly. "Or us. We have fought too hard to build this to let anyone destroy it." The announcement of the royal twins' birth was met with celebration throughout the kingdom. Even some of the most resistant nobles sent gifts and congratulations. The line of succession was secured. The bond between king and queen had produced heirs. Stability seemed assured. But not everyone celebrated. In the far southern territories, in a small village where exiled rogues sometimes gathered, Griffin Blackridge received word of the births. His arm, ruined during the failed library attack, hung useless at his side. His face, once handsome, had grown gaunt with hardship. 2 daughters, his companion said, another exile bitter at their circumstances. "The kingdom rejoices while we rot." Griffin said nothing, but in his eyes burned a hatred that had not dimmed with time or distance. He had lost everything: rank, family, future, and in his mind, it was all because of one low-born Omega who had stolen what should never have been hers. The years would pass. The twins would grow. The kingdom would continue changing under Freya's influence. But somewhere in the shadows, Griffin waited. And in waiting, he planned. For now, though, in the royal chambers of Ravenmoor, Freya held her daughters and felt Magnus's presence through their bond and allowed herself to believe that peace was possible. She had come so far from that night in Blackridge's great hall, soaked in wine and humiliation, fleeing into the forest with nothing but pain and anger. Now she sat in silk and candlelight, crowned and bonded, mother to future queens, proof that the cruelest beginnings could transform into the most unexpected endings. Her grandmother would have been proud. Freya chose to believe that somehow, Wherever Alara's spirit rested, she knew what her granddaughter had become. "What will we name them?" Magnus asked, gently touching one tiny hand. Freya considered. "The older one, Alara, for my grandmother, and the younger," she smiled, "Lyanna. It means light in the old tongue." "Alara and Lyanna," Magnus repeated, testing the names. "Our daughters, our future." Outside the windows, dawn broke over Ravenmoor, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. A new day, a new era. And despite the shadows that would always lurk at the edges, Freya chose to focus on the light. She had survived the worst. She had claimed her power. She had transformed a kingdom. And that, she decided, was story worth telling for generations to come. The end.